Welcome to the Unscripted podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Nicastro. Today, we're going to be talking about what it takes to make an impact as a regional leader within a large global business. I'm excited to welcome back to the podcast Madhu Oza, who is the Director for Global Technical and Service Excellence at Abbott Laboratories and a Standout 50 leader. Madhu, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Sarah. Good to be back.
Yes, thrilled you're here. It's been longer than it seems since you were here last. Excited to have you back. And your role has changed quite a bit since you were on last, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. But, thinking about, I guess, the nature of the scope of your role regionally, can you just tell everyone a little bit about what you do and what APAC includes for your role at Abbott?
Sure. So, my role, you're right, has evolved over the past few years here since I've relocated to Singapore. But my core responsibility has been, solid and continues to be leading the services, as in capital equipment services for our customers for the electrophysiology business at Abbott. For Asia Pacific. And what that encompasses is everywhere from Japan, China, in Northern Asia, to Southeast Asia, here Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, and this part of the continent, as well as India and then Australia. What we do is our goal is to manage the installation, maintenance, and any kind of issues with our capital equipment that's installed in these hospitals. And of course, this has evolved more and more into not just field services but also remote services.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think in total, you had said you lead across 15 countries, very different countries. And that sounds like a challenging and complex role. What are some of the, I guess, unique aspects of leading across that many different countries, and how do you navigate those?
Um, Good question. And I do get asked this a lot. And I will say that it is a learning journey for me. What I'm telling you here are my observations and my learnings, and certainly not to be taken as the sole truth. But I've been very, very fortunate in having this opportunity to do this learning. I think, the way I think about it is that, the complexity is in two major areas. One area is sort of operations related, and the other is people related, and they're very intertwined. But operationally, it is important to sort of understand how culture pervades business practices. And it happens all the time. You need to understand the cultural context, but at the same time be able to separate what's cultural context or cultural practices from maybe poor execution, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the challenge of having and understanding all of these potentially varying processes or practices, but then, as I said, determining, what's yes, that is truly how the culture requires it to be, versus no, that's lack of ownership, lack of
Mm-hmm.
execution, discipline, how to make that judgment, right? That makes it very complicated. And as we're in any large organization, we're driven by centralized processes
Mm-hmm.
and SOPs. And you need that discipline, right, to be able to manage large operations. So here you are, being told that everyone needs to follow this process or this business practice, and yet you see these variances and how to represent those variances, I think becomes really important and challenging. Um, and then I think on the people front, right, so that one's obvious. Managing teams as well as managing stakeholder relationships
Mm-hmm.
in the various cultures can be very complex. Possibly the hardest part of my job since day one, and the most rewarding, because culturally, what you see is that you know what shapes people's work culture
Mm-hmm.
is really coming from thousands of years of history, education, social norms, and so on. And so if you don't understand that mindset, it's hard to know why a team in Japan maybe reacts differently to a
Mm-hmm.
team in China when you've asked them for the same exact you're trying to do the same exact project or a new initiative or whatever, what have you, right? But it is extremely different how you're actually going to manage that change in
Mm-hmm.
those two cultures, right? For example, what I see is what I have learned is that in Japan, our teams tend to be very, very risk aware,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of decisions are driven by consensus. And whereas and what that means is that change will take time.
Mm-hmm.
Change will take time, but when it is when people have bought into it, then the execution will be top notch
Mm-hmm.
and the ownership will be absolute. um, what happens on the other hand, in a China team that I have seen is that the teams in China are very resourceful,
Mm-hmm.
and they are entrepreneurial. They want to make change. They're
Mm-hmm.
open to experimenting, right? And so it's a whole different ball game as to how to manage that change.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of, yeah. So having that knowledge as a leader is what enables you to work with those teams in the most productive way, right? On one hand, you know that a certain team is going to be have not as high of an appetite for change. They're going to need to, warm up to the idea a bit more to kind of build consensus. On the other hand, you have folks you might need to rein in a little bit because they're ready to go and do things and try things, and you need to make sure they're, have the appropriate parameters. How have you, as a, you know, as the leader, how have you spent the time you needed to kind of get to know the teams themselves, but also what those cultural norms are and how that impacts what individuals want from the workplace and your working relationship with them?
Um, so again, I think this is not rocket science. I'm pretty sure any leader who's managing a region will tell you the same thing, is that it is you have to put in the time.
Mm-hmm.
And by time, I mean time in the, immersed into that culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to, first of all, you do need to be on the ground, right? We must visit. There's no way to manage Asia Pacific from a screen.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work. Um, you do need to be in the country. You do need to visit often. And I think that one key thing that I've learned when I'm there, I don't just go to the office. I go, visit customers, visit partners.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm invited to someone's home, which by the way is common in the region, you don't say no.
Mm-hmm.
I go to their home with an open mind. And honestly, those episodes teach you so much more
Mm-hmm.
than reading a book would ever, right? You can read all the leadership books in the world, but actually meeting families or other partners or other stakeholders and understanding their viewpoints teaches you a whole lot more. So I think one of the things is of course visiting,
Mm-hmm.
and then when you're there, going, being a little bit more lateral, not just top down.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about going there and talking to your teams and just visiting the teams. It's sort of the lateral movement and perceptions that you get from understanding maybe other partners, other functions in the company,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. So yes, I think that really has helped to shape my perception of just not just the culture, but also how I can adapt.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say how I can help, because honestly, it's not about that. It's not about me helping or shaping them. It's really just me adapting to
Mm-hmm.
understand how to most effectively provide my team what they need to be the best team they can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and understanding that will look different from country to country. So
Exactly.
so I love what you said about, spending that time and not just going to talk to the team, but really immersing yourself and, being curious, being open-minded, getting to know people, spending time. Um, I love how you said, there's no substitute for that. You can't learn that from reading a book. I think sometimes I talk to leaders who really wish, and I understand why, that there was a shortcut to actually spending time in person with people because it's tough, right? It can be a huge commitment, but I don't think there is. The next question I wanted to ask, and I'm sure that is a big piece of it, is, with you leading all of these teams that are so geographically dispersed, how do you keep them from feeling disconnected? They're obviously close-knit teams in and of themselves, but how do you make them feel connected to the bigger picture?
Yeah, about this disconnectedness, I'll just start by saying this just reminded me, when COVID started and all these teams across the world, started realizing that it was so difficult to stay connected. And, there were entire talks on how to keep your teams connected. And I thought to myself, as leading a field services organization, I've had to deal with this for years. This was not new.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is a conundrum for everyone, right? Everyone who's in the field services area. Um, and I think that, of what I've learned so far, and I'm pretty sure I don't have it all down, but what I like to do is create common spaces
Mm-hmm.
for people who are out there in the field doing their jobs day in and day out. And what I mean by that is that whether it is in person or it is virtual, we need to, I like to create places of common gathering.
Mm-hmm.
That could be in the form of, at the most expensive, way to do that is to actually bring people together a couple of times a year. And we do that. I
Mm-hmm.
do like to, I do like to bring at least the teams within a given country together a couple of times a year. But as you know, it's not really possible to say, okay, I'm going to have the entire field force team get together, from Asia Pacific, a couple of times a year. That would be prohibitively expensive, and I'm not sure that gives you the bang for your buck, really.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Instead, what we do is we do have smaller gatherings within countries, for example, at which, I again try to spend as much time as possible understanding. But then it's really great to see teams, interacting with each other at that point of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, so I came from a world of R&D and, telemedicine operations back in the States, right? And I took it always for granted because most of the team would be in front of, would be in this office, and, creating a culture of connection was not even, a thing. It just happened. And so I think, the appreciation I have for having to create that now in field services is very high.
Hmm.
So watching the teams when they're together interacting, I think is amazing. But, really, I mean, there's a lot of simple things that, I've learned to do, even from from the folks who report to me, right? They've contributed greatly in my education as well. And what we've been doing is sort of creating virtual space. And that doesn't mean just hey, everybody get together and have a coffee and chat about, your dog or your weekend or whatever. That helps too.
Hmm.
But what we do is we try to create common spaces when it comes to work. And so maybe having, regular best practice calls where different people have to present. It makes that person feel a lot more connected and a lot more
Hmm.
vested and accountable. Other things we do is, sort of have these competitions. Maybe it's a serious competition, like highest number of work orders, or fastest XYZ, although those can be dangerous too. Or it can be just goofy stuff,
Hmm.
like weirdest weekend hobby, or things like that. Um, Got to have some of those things created where people can get together, whether it's virtual, whether it's just even being part of a context online,
Hmm.
even if it's through emails, and eventually meeting virtually. I think that I think that those make a real impact. Two teams who are not sitting there meeting every day and can just take off for a coffee together.
Hmm.
um, so I think that that's been really good. The other thing that I think that we've done, and we were taught almost by COVID, honestly, is that while I manage many countries of Asia Pacific, and generally countries tend to be self-sufficient, right? They
Hmm.
have to be, because of language requirements and needs and cultural needs and so on. An engineer in Japan will only get so far, if they have to go do services in Japan, in China, or in India,
Hmm.
right? And so what we do is that, as much as possible, we try to have some cross-country collaboration and helping.
Hmm.
And so let's say when, country A is going to have a big launch and they're going to be, overworked or whatever, then, you say, okay, let me help them by bringing someone who is adaptable. It's not a whole team, but I can get, a person from Australia and a person from India to go over and help you.
Hmm.
And that just, that again creates that forum for people to get together.
Yeah.
So it's just about making sure that we try to make sure that we take every opportunity to build that common space, that common understanding.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it is really important. It's interesting what you're describing is you have all of these self-sufficient entities, which on one hand is great, right? The fact that they understand their region so well, they know what is expected, they know what they need to accomplish. But it's also important for them to remember in a positive way that they're connected to something bigger, right? And I remember a couple of years ago, Tetra Pak did a employee engagement project specifically in field service, and they actually one of the things that they found is where they wanted to improve is that a lot of their field technicians, said that they feel closer to their customers' culture than they do the company culture. Because when you think about the fact that they're spending more time with customers, often than they are the organization, it emphasizes that you as a leader have to figure out how do you draw them together. And it isn't just about the idea of making sure everyone does what they need to. It's more so about making sure that they feel connected and part of something bigger. And, there's this sense of getting to know people a bit more than just their close-knit team.
Absolutely. Actually, that is very true of some of our people. I would just maybe modify it a little bit, where I would say that, for some of our people, especially where the team is smaller, right? Let's say in a given country, um, the team feels, of course, close to each other,
Hmm.
but there's only like two of them there, let's say, right? But the country has a larger presence, let's say, from a commercial standpoint, or the regulatory team, the quality team. It doesn't, whoever, right? It's actually their culture. It's the
Hmm.
stakeholders' culture that becomes more familiar
Hmm.
to those field service people,
Yeah.
because that's who they're interacting with more than, say the Asia Pacific leadership or what have you.
Right.
And I think that one of the things that I learned, probably the hard way, is that, going into when you go into, visiting the countries, building relationships with stakeholders is incredibly
Hmm.
important, not just for yourself or for the business, but actually to help now, to because your people in that region are dependent on all of their stakeholders.
Right.
And so when you have a relationship with them, there's this connection that goes around, all the way through.
Yeah.
Um, Absolutely,
And
really
we've
helps.
talked many times, about the perception that sometimes can exist about service versus the rest of the business. Field service teams not feeling that they get the same type of respect or recognition, right? So if you have stakeholders in that local area that are kind of reinforcing some of those things, right? You could be doing a wonderful job, but they're experiencing something more in person that, could be different. Yeah, that's a good point. I guess a related point is, you are leading Asia Pacific within a company that is US based. So, how have you felt about, finding a voice, not necessarily for yourself, but for your region within this broader, mothership or what have you?
Really good question. I suppose, so I've been very, very lucky, very fortunate that, I'm in an organization that doesn't have that kind of any kind of bias, let's just say, right?
Hmm.
However, it is perfectly natural. For example, when a new process or a new SOP or a new product is being designed, that the people who are designing them are doing them for the region they know the best.
Hmm.
In this case, it would be the US, right? And trying to understand the rest of us, and the rest of the markets as well. But with all the best intentions, of course, sometimes it happens that there's bias, there's development bias towards wherever you're actually located.
Hmm.
And so it's definitely a very, very big part of my role, I think, is I would say it's half my job, is to represent my business, my markets, and my people to the mothership, as you call it.
Hmm.
And it's that is also a work in progress. Ensuring that you are able to succinctly explain, what's happening in these countries, why it's important, I think is important. But explaining can only do so much.
Hmm.
So I have used over the years a few tools. Sometimes it's numbers. I think that numbers do speak, and while they don't give you all the context, it is very important to show the scale,
Hmm.
to just show the scale of the size of the markets. Maybe it's the difficulties in operations, or what have you. I think that that's important. Um, the other thing I think that has worked really well is whenever I have invited leaders from the US to come and visit my markets here,
Mm-hmm.
it is so telling. It is, the understanding that they get from a single visit
Mm-hmm.
is tremendous. And so I think that, that's been a very, very effective way, honestly, of ensuring that, the region is well represented.
Yeah.
And so it needs to be done all the time. But there's a couple of other things. So, I think, of course, as I said, so big part of it, marketing my team.
Mm-hmm.
I market my team because they're amazing. I've built some, really a great team with a great culture, I think. And these people are really they're phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
And they're responsible for me learning every day how to manage things here. So I market my team like crazy. I also, the other thing we do is we offer to help if
Mm-hmm.
needed. And I think that that changes the perception, right? Going from oh, yes, we need to develop such and such for the Asia Pacific markets, the narrative changes to, oh, these guys, they helped us, they offered to help, and now they're designing part of this process.
Mm-hmm.
It completely changes how we are seen, and how we're perceived, as well as it helps build relationships. So really, those are the things I think that work. It's marketing the team, but also maybe participating more in those
Mm-hmm.
activities.
Yeah. Yeah, because you learn in doing that too, right? You're positioning yourself and your team as more willing to help, but then you're learning more about whatever region you're working in that you don't work in day to day or whatever function, what have you.
Right.
I think it's really interesting, like this whole conversation and how it's evolved over time because I remember at one point, everyone I talked to, every organization was making a huge push toward global standardization and centralize everything and everyone do everything the exact same way, right? And, it's definitely not the case anymore. There needs to be consistency and, standard processes and all of that. But, it's just interesting the dynamic that created between the entity and the regions or the teams on the ground of feeling like global is trying to control everything and global feels like the regions are just saying that they need something unique just because, right? It's and so I think a lot of organizations are kind of evolving past that, and to your point, in a region with so many distinct cultures, it is difficult to succinctly explain, well, actually, that might not work here, and here's why, right? Versus some others. So, yeah, that's really interesting. Um,
Yeah, I mean, just to complete my thought on that particular topic, it's absolutely ever present. Um, because it is natural that we consider absolute standardization as absolute efficiency.
mhm,
And while that absolutely sounds right theoretically, that's not how the real world works, right? So
mhm,
one of the things that we have found is, in working in Asia Pacific, is that separating out the really hard requirements from things that are just nice or seem like best practices have really helped us,
mhm,
to say, okay, this is a requirement, whether it's from a quality perspective or a data perspective and efficiency perspective, whatever it is, right? Weeding out those hard requirements from the things that, were just because someone else did them and they worked
mhm,
really well, they may or may not work well, right? So the what and the how. So you still need the what. You still
mhm.
absolutely want standardization. I'm a big believer in it. But weeding out the things that don't need to be standardized,
Right.
and can be left, the hows that can be left up to the best way that a team wants to accomplish that within these requirements. Very, very big part of, I think, our journey.
Yeah, and I think really important from a leadership perspective, right? I mean, if you just think about the talent landscape, right? No one wants to be told, you are nothing more than a body that is coming in to do exactly what we say, exactly how we've spec'd it, with no room for autonomy. So, to your point, like, what is the outcome we need to achieve, and what are the hard requirements of achieving that? And then, what else can we let them do the way they feel is best so that they can feel a sense of ownership, so that they feel empowered, and it's a to your point, I mean, a delicate balance and an interesting relationship, but I think you see more and more companies looking to strike that balance instead of feeling like, this idea of standardizing everything is going to work, right? Because it's just not, like you said, not realistic in real life. So you mentioned you have a wonderful team. And in your time in your role, you've built out a team that you really trust, which I can understand based on what you've said, how important that would be, being that you can't be all of these places all of the time. Um, how did you find great people? And, what do you how have you would be replicable advice wise for how you've created a good working relationship where have people that you can trust so well in your areas?
I think this is something that I'm sure that every leader gets asked this question around building teams, and the reason I think is because it's the most important thing that you're going to do. um, it the answer is no different here than in any other part of the world.
Hmm.
There is definitely some trial and error, right? You're gonna inherit people. You're going to hire people, and you're going to try it out, and you're going to make mistakes sometimes finding the right people, but at some point of time you will find them. When you find them, hold on to them.
Hmm.
But the way to hold on to them, I think, is what's different. It's not, just don't let them leave, shower them with raises and promotions, but rather understand where they're coming from, what they need, and what they're looking for from work,
Hmm.
from a boss, and then of course help them get there. A lot of times it's about a feeling of accomplishment, a feeling of belonging, and so on. So I think that's the standard thing I think that people, leaders have to do. Um, the thing that I think has helped here, despite these big cultural differences, is how do I create a team that feels like a unit,
Hmm.
where every person on my team is a different nationality, every single person, right?
Hmm.
And so and they're different people as well, of course, so it's not a unique problem that Asia Pacific leaders have. Everywhere people are different, but added to that, there's the cultural context of different
Hmm.
of people who are culturally different on a team. And I think that again requires some work, but going back to the common spaces,
Hmm.
right? It's about creating that common space or common playground where we all play. It is, having these regular face-to-face meetings, virtual meetings, fun meetings, but also intertwining work together,
Hmm.
and celebrating the successes, and then helping others when they need that help, right? Um, but I think one thing that I think that really helps is understanding how to communicate, or something that I've learned over the years is how people perceive things.
Hmm.
If you look at, there was some really great studies that have been done that are in Erin Meyer's books, about a book about understanding cultures, and it's about how, if you show a person, in a lot of cultures in Asia tend to be high, I think what she calls is high context. And what that means is that, there is a lot more that you're communicating than just your words.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in other low context cultures, what you say is accepted at face value,
Mm-hmm.
that is what you're saying. But high context cultures, there's a lot of reading between lines, reading the room. In fact, there's a term in Japanese called reading the room. And if you don't read the room, then you're not considered a good communicator.
Mm-hmm.
And so understanding that those, that high context cultures need a lot more than just your words, um, helps to bring your point across to the team,
Yeah.
uh, without threatening anybody, which is the last thing you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, having understanding that, but also helping all your team members understand each other's,
Mm-hmm.
whether you're high context, low context, it really enriches the team.
Yeah.
And so it's a challenge, will not deny. But really, again, there's no easy way to it. There's no blueprint or anything. It's you've got to do the work, get to know the people, create the common spaces, and really drive every single day that culture of
Mm-hmm.
being one team.
Yeah, and respecting one another and listening to
Exactly.
one another. And yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking like, um, it's almost like a microcosm of what you would like to see more of in the world, where you have very distinct, right, representatives that what you're looking for then is what is the common ground, both in how we interact, what we want from our work, but also what we're trying to achieve and how do we kind of rally ourselves around that. Um, and to your point, not let miscommunications or misperceptions of communication take hold. And, that requires accountability on everyone's perspective of saying, I heard you say this, or like, am I understanding you correctly or what have you, instead
Yes.
of just reading the room and then turning around and saying like, what a
Yes.
jerk, or, whatever, right? It's even worse if you aren't communicating frequently or well, right? Because you're leaving so much up to interpretation. Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, there's actually and this in itself is a topic for like hours. But I'll just give you one example of, there was like this funny joke, and not from Asia Pacific, but around, the Anglo-Dutch dictionary or translation guide. And it had a few examples, but one of them was like where, when the British boss said, um, that's an interesting idea. And what the British boss actually meant,
Hmm.
that's a really bad idea. And what the Dutch subordinate heard was, that's a really good idea.
Hmm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's so
yeah, so
true
then
though.
yeah, exactly. And
Yeah.
so now you take, cultures that don't even speak the same language, and
Right.
when they do, it is, yeah, it can be quite. And so you're right, making sure that we clarify, and rather than let it fester or,
Hmm.
assume, I think is another part of it. But to your point, ultimately, got to rally around the common goals,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Celebrate the differences where they are justified,
Hmm.
learn from each other, drive towards the same goals
Yeah.
every day. Yeah.
It really, I mean, I'm sure it is challenging, but what a wonderful opportunity, not only for yourself, but for each of those leaders to have that chance to, understand one another and, learn as much as you learn by interacting in those ways. Okay. So you, since we spoke last, your role has expanded to include overseeing a global service excellence initiative. Can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I, in addition to my Asia Pacific role, I've got an expanded role overseeing the global service excellence initiatives, which encompass, I think of it as an enablement of services.
Hmm.
And by that, what I mean is it's twofold. It's the tools and processes that used by the service teams, whether it is, whether it is, our CRM or any kind of software apps that we develop for efficiency or what have you. And the other piece of it is analytics, which enable us to run our business, our services, our operations effectively, efficiently, with the best possible customer experience.
Hmm.
That's really the goal of this new function that I now lead.
Okay, great. And what are your biggest focus areas at the moment? Like how long has this been going? What have you kind of tackled thus far, and what is on the horizon?
I think that uh, it's very new. It's
Hmm.
been about a year or so that since it was official, since it's been official. And as I said, we've kind of started on the analytics journey, which is in turn tied to the CRM or to your tool because that's where the data is coming from, and so on. So we're on that journey.
Hmm.
We've I think gotten pretty far when I think about it in a year, but we have a long, long way to go.
Hmm.
I think one thing that I will say that I think I've learned from this, very, very, or something that surprised me a little bit, in a good way, is that, of course, you need trust from the larger team for you to be able to do this. And by that, what do I mean? I'm an Asia Pacific leader,
Hmm.
right? It's in my title. It's the biggest part of my role. And yet now I am talking about analytics or processes or tools to other regions.
Hmm.
And they need to be able to trust me to be
Hmm.
able to for this to work. And I've been very blessed by that, and I feel fortunate about that. Right? It might not have been, and then where would I be? It wouldn't work at all.
Hmm.
So I think that it starts with trust when you have a function that is literally sort of getting into everyone's business,
Hmm.
right? To put it bluntly, but with the best of intentions. I think the other thing that I found that the huge progress that I feel like we've made is that having this kind of function, which I think it's a more mature function, right, for a mature business or organization,
Hmm.
having this kind of function really builds your credibility with other functions and within the organization.
Hmm.
And that's been very gratifying to see. And of course hope to continue more, but it's early still in the
Yeah.
journey.
Going back to what we spoke about earlier, part of this is just what we talked about with, as you're kind of going into these different regions to say, hey, let's look at analytics, let's look at these processes or these tools, let's figure out, what excellence looks like, right? It requires you to kind of ease the concern of I'm not one person or entity coming in to say, this is the way, this is what everyone has to do prescriptively. I'm trying to curate across our entire organization what is working well, how can we learn from that, what should we replicate, what are the best practices, right? And to your point, like that does take uh, some skill and patience and, to build that trust because I think anyone's first inclination is going to be kind of like, what? Anytime there's that global versus regional or local, just like we were talking about. But I do think this idea of, not, hey, let's standardize everything everywhere all the time, but more so let's apply data and intelligence to see what is working and, where should we expand that or replicate that? What is no longer serving us, and how do we prove that so that no one feels like it's personal or what have you? It's a really tall task, but yeah, I think if you get it right, it definitely builds respect within the organization, but also will have a really positive impact on customer experience and, everything else as well.
Absolutely. Customer experience is something that, um, it's sometimes easy to get lost in the numbers and not think about that. I
Hmm.
think that's something we really want to keep in mind. But I think the other offshoot from this is employee experience.
Hmm.
When we are doing things better, more efficiently, etc., it actually really positively impacts the engineers who, anyway, to your earlier point, are they feeling disconnected, from the organization and so on. And then when you provide something that helps the employee, even if it's like to cut down 2 minutes from
Hmm.
their paperwork, or whatever, not two but 10 minutes from their paperwork, it's a hugely positive impact on them.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I think it stems from coming at it through a lens of curiosity instead of control. What people are used to is that someone coming in to analyze, reflect, refine wants to control what's happening versus like we have this huge global organization. Let's get curious about where the opportunity is or what's working well. And yeah, really good stuff. All right, Madhu, do you have any final advice or words of wisdom for folks on, how to stand out in a regional leadership role in a big global organization?
There's at the risk of repeating myself, I will say that know your teams, know them as people, be curious, and you know, half the job of being a good regional leader is absolutely to represent and market the heck out of your team.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you believe in your team and how good they are, then, have others believe in them as well, and
Yeah.
showcase what they can do and what you and your region is doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit of that marketing that really needs to, that opens up the perceptions of the mothership to your team.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's a very, very key piece that I would repeat.
Good. That's really good
Yeah.
advice. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about all of this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarah. That was really great fun. I didn't realize time just flew by.
It does. It flies by. Thank you so much. You can find more by visiting the home of Unscripted at futureoffieldservice.com. The podcast is published in partnership with IFS. You can learn more at ifs.com. As always, thank you for listening.